Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. My wife and co-host here has returned to Canada. She was down doing Shred Girls events, and so welcome back, my wife and co-host.
Thank you, dear. I'm glad we put wife first. Sometimes
it depends on the week.
I was going to say, sometimes it feels like co-host first. Am I right? But yes, very, very happy to be back. Very tired. Lots of Shred Girl stuff in the past week. I was in Connecticut. I was in Pennsylvania. I was in New Jersey. Got to hang out with the NICA New Jersey crew this weekend, which felt like a bit of a homecoming, to be honest. The announcer was actually lovely. Big shout out to him, which is sort of funny shouting out an announcer. But he's been around NICA New Jersey since it pretty much started. And, you know, so have I. Like NICA New Jersey and Shred Girls were pretty much... I'd have to fact check it, but I think actually started the same year, basically. So, you know, we were doing stuff with NICA New Jersey since the Shred Girls started. So obviously I have a, major fondness for...
I recall us going to an event. They made us Shred Girl and Shred Boy
number plates.
Yeah. And that was a while. That was maybe like 2017 or 18, maybe.
Yeah, and that was actually the second time I had done something with them, because the first time, it was like I think their first ever girls ride actually, and it was the original Shred Girls version.
Okay. And you mountain biked, which was a new thing. So you're out on your Trek Pro Caliber, which is bright red, which is not Molly's color, but we have her on this bright red racy hardtail.
We're going to call it like actually a little orangey.
Okay.
That just
How did it go over? Were people calling you on the colorful bicycle?
No, thankfully no one has pointed it out yet. But yeah, I had a lot of fun playing on that. I actually was more on it in Connecticut when I was working with the Stoked One cycling team, which is a bunch of kids. Awesome. Super fun. We did just a bunch of drills in a field and had a blast. And like when I tell you, like they call it Ring of Fire. You might know it as Circle of Death. It's where you're riding in a circle, kind of trying to like knock each other out. Sometimes the game isn't where you're knocking each other out. You're just kind of all riding in a progressively getting smaller circle, and like everyone's trying to be like nice to each other. This was not the case. This was like just knock down, drag out, which honestly was kind of awesome to see.
Sure.
So yeah, I put myself out very quickly in that.
Fair
Didn't
enough.
want to be like knocking over like the 2-year-old on a strider who was out hanging out with us.
All right. Well, we have a couple Q&As today. So did you want to get into those?
Yeah, for sure. And just a reminder that if you do have a question, we now have an anonymous question form we include as a link in the show notes. If you don't want to ask us on Instagram or just on our contact page, feel free to use that. Yeah, the first question actually has just come in. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about my win at the Sulphur Springs 100 miler, and we sort of talked a lot about the race day, but we got a couple questions about what my training looks like. And I kept responding to people that my training is very, very boring. Very, very boring. But people wanted to hear about it. So...
Right. Well, and so, yeah, I think some of these case studies are interesting. And so I think probably the biggest question that some people would say is, you must run 100 miles every week, in the week or even in one day to prepare for doing 100 miles. So did you, in fact, do a 100-mile run to prepare for your 100-mile run?
Only if you count the last 100 miler I did like 3 years ago.
Right. Okay. And so that was the last time you did that long. And then what would you say? I'm trying to think how we'll parse this out quickly, but do you have a sense of sort of your average weekly volume maybe in the, 12 weeks before?
Yeah. I mean, I would say in general, the thing is like my training doesn't really change that much throughout the year. It's always kind of a baseline of like roughly 100K weeks. So like 60 to 70 miles, give or take, just depending on how long the long runs on the weekend are. And, 3 weeks out, I think, from the 100, I did I had like 2 back-to-back big weekends and with like a big week in between. So I did, I think, 100-mile week and then one like probably 80-ish, 85-ish mile week. But the 2 back-to-back runs were like a 25 and a 20-mile like Saturday, Sunday. And that was after like a pretty high volume training week and like 2015 or something the weekend before. So like I'd done a pretty big weekend. I'd had a pretty like heavy training week and then went into like 2 back-to-back really long runs. But I mean, all in, like that's not wild. Like I would say a pretty low volume ultra runner.
Right. And so you don't do a lot of double days. You didn't do a lot of cross training in there.
No, I do 2 really quick strength workouts every week. In addition to, I have my morning core yoga routine that you can find on our website that I've done.
Put that in the show notes.
Every day for, I think, going on 12 years
so
now.
Those little sort of, daily strength core. I know a lot of our athletes that we work with do your core or your morning yoga routine or one of your yogas quite often. And you humble a lot of people with the planks and the push-ups that are in this quote unquote morning yoga that sounds very peaceful, but it's actually vicious pull-ups and planking.
Yeah, it's 5 minutes of planks and 50 push-ups by the time you're done with it, plus some yoga flow.
And it strikes me, that volume across the year and consistency. And again, if you look back when David, your coach, was on, that was 3 or 4 years ago, and he said, I think you can do really well at Leadville, but like you got to give it 3 years. And so I think you were doing well at Leadville last year, and we don't need to retrace that. But things happen. You sort of crashed out of that, but like performance wise, you were good and ready. And then I think this was sort of like a redemption of that. You can run for 100 miles vigorously, and you got it done. But I think the recipe is that, as you say, it's not interesting because it's sort of just you run consistently and it's gradually built over those 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every day my comment to David when I'm putting in my coaching notes is that the run was fancy business, which means nothing fancy, all business. Mm-hmm. And that is my consistent thing.
So then maybe again, some of these like headline data stats is, what would you say the biggest run was? You did 25 miles followed by a 20 miler.
Yeah, normally honestly, I probably would have liked to have done like a 50K or 50 mile race,
like
but
pre-race. Yeah.
The reality is this race was in late May, but in Canada, you really wouldn't want to race a 50 miler before that.
And we had debated maybe doing one after Sea Otter or something. It just didn't work out with the travel home.
No, it was sort of the debate of, do you want to get a couple extra weeks of really solid training, or do you want to take an extra week of travel and the travel days and all that?
Okay. And so we talked about strength training. We talked about, you usually take a rest day most weeks.
I take a rest day every week.
Yeah. So like Monday is just sort of classic rest day usually for you.
Yeah. And, that to me is like very non-negotiable. Like the most I'll do is, I do my morning routine, obviously, but then, we're recording this on a Monday and we have the kids program tonight. So I'll go up and I'll like play around there, but that's
and this is a different phase. Like you're not necessarily like charging at 100 miler.
For sure. Yeah. Right now I'm very casual. That said, if I think people might also be wondering what recovery looks like from the 100. So to kind of give the quick synopsis of that, like I took, I think 4 days off. We were actually walking by so I finished the race late Saturday and we did our normal walk on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little short, but yeah, Monday I was at the kids thing. I didn't ride, but I was walking around fine. So I was actually feeling muscularly a lot better than I expected to. So by, I think by Wednesday or Thursday, I went on a couple little bike rides. Friday I was running.
And just short, like you did
very short.
You did an errand run, I think.
I did a
5K.
5K. And then Saturday we had the kids, our big Shred Girls launch party, so that was busy. It's been a really weird couple weeks just because I've had a lot of travel, a lot of events, a lot of stuff going on, so it's been a bit sporadic. But I'd say last week I more or less got back to my normal training schedule of just.
Okay. And then maybe the last question then, going back to sort of like the training would be, was there like a particular like interval set or something that you remember over the last like month or two that sort of was leading into the preparation for 100 miles?
I mean, I do, as I've talked about, like one interval workout a week on Wednesdays. I would say probably the one that I think is like the most effective, that I don't want to say it because I actually really hate doing them, was doing like, I think it was a 5 1 mile hard workout.
Okay. Simple. 5 by 1 mile.
Yeah. With a couple minutes in between. Simple, but not simple because that is much harder from and I actually have to hit the lap button on your watch instead of just watching the time. And that, I usually do time versus distance for intervals, and I dislike doing distance for intervals, but it definitely has some value.
Okay. And okay, so that's good. And so one workout, one like harder workout. Again, your Saturdays tend to be like moderate at least.
Oh, that's what I was actually going to say. I think like a couple of the best workouts that I did to get ready for this race were actually when we were staying with our friends in Laguna in California. You couldn't do anything from their house without running like up 800 feet, down 800 feet, like pretty much off the bat. And everything was just up, down, up, down, up, down. I think that like 10 days we had out there was the best training for this. Even though this didn't have any like sustained climbs, it was, almost 14,000 feet of climbing and descending. You're pretty much, you're on that course. You're always going up or down. There's maybe 500 meters where you're on like flat. And I think having those really aggressive uphills in Laguna and the really aggressive downhills in Laguna were probably the most valuable thing that I did.
Because it's a hilly race, this one you did, but there's not super big climbs, but probably those did prepare you for this Martin Road, the finish to Paris to Ancaster, which we talked about in the
more
race
even the
debrief.
Start when you go down Martin Road.
And yeah, the pounding up and down is probably great preparation. And I think it's just, if people are trying to think of takeaways here, it's, again, not fancy, it's consistent. So not hero workouts most of the time. You had a couple big breakthrough weeks that you were ready to be done with the run, but most of it is stuff you've built up to consistently. It's not 7 vomit workouts a week. It's 1 5x1 mile or whatever the set is for the week. During the week, it's a rest day on Monday. And so I think if there's takeaways, it's sort of, as you say, it's not interesting in that it's 1 rest day, 1 interval, a hilly run on Saturday, a longer run, somewhere on the weekend. I think it's just keep doing that.
Fancy business.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move on. If people have other, more specific sort of follow-ups, that would be good. 2 books, like obviously David and Megan's book, Happy Runner, has components of their training. It's maybe getting older and maybe their views have changed, but I think it's still a fantastic book. And the mindset is a big piece of the Happy Runner, obviously. And then the book that always sort of strikes me as like similar is Matt Fitzgerald and Brad Hudson have an older book called Run Faster, I think is what it's called. And that's like one of the like top 4 books I always sort of like keep at hand. And the philosophy and the theory works well, I think, in cycling or whatever, but it's sort of similar to what Molly's doing a little bit. As much as that book was sort of targeted more at like under marathon, I think it's like pretty similar. And, there's a bit of strides, there's a bit of hill work, there's a bit of intervals, but like nothing excessive. The volume's not excessive. And it's year round, sort of just like keeping on it. So if anyone's sort of curious, those would be 2 to sort of dive deeper on.
For sure. Okay. All right. Next question. We have a daytime shift worker who works an alternating schedule as follows: 12-hour days, week 1. So Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, with Wednesday and Thursday off. And then week 2 is Wednesday, Thursday, with Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. Whew. That is tricky.
So the second week you get 5 days off?
I think that's what they're saying.
Okay.
So how does one optimize training to avoid the loss of gains on the busy work week? So, the first week they're working like, it looks like almost like 60 hours. And the next week they're working more like 20.
Yeah, that's a wild schedule.
And I think like to start with, like, often when we talk about training theory, it's with the context of like you work a 9 to 5, you have weekends off. So here's the training plan. That's
or even back up. Probably it comes from like you were doping in the 70s, and this is the doping pattern that we were going off of. That's probably where a lot of this comes from.
Fair enough, yeah. And pretty much any training plan you download online, and like it tracks. Like we do this too. It's not like we're accusing people of being jerks for having training plans that generally are assuming that you work Monday to Friday and then have Saturday, Sunday to do longer things. Yeah. But the vast majority of people do not have a schedule that is actually set up like that.
A lot of my athletes will do like Sundays off. That sort of got more popular off of the pandemic when everyone sort of got onto different schedules and were a bit more flexible. But a lot of people just family or church or both or whatever they're doing on Sundays. And a lot of times they'll sort of take that as the day off and then train on Monday. And
I mean, as we're learning with like real estate agents, for example, they're just always working, often at like 10 p.m. for some reason.
Right. So with this, I mean, I've seen some pros actually just recently posting around Unbound that they were essentially doing like massive 30-hour week and then like a 8-hour week to try and do something different, or I don't know if it worked into their life or what was this thing. So you see people do this sort of like on off pattern. It's not really that much different than your, Joe Friel style masters thing where you say instead of 3 weeks on, where you take 2 weeks on and then 1 week off, it's really just one step further. So what would you do? I think you would obviously train more and then just take it a bit as like a deload and just on and off and on and off and work like that. I don't think there's I think there's actually great opportunity there. We have had other episodes like the one with Jim, and he talked a lot about working as a doctor and sort of how he's organized things, and he's very routinized about his sleep and during the day with the noise and the light, trying to get that so that the night shift is less damaging to his training. So that would be ones to go back and look at. Jim Slauson, Dr. Jim. We've talked about it on a few Q&As too, but I think we can rehash it here and revisit it. And so I do think it's how can you be the healthiest person you can? And we're not telling you to stop doing night shift. I think that's what gets grating for people on night shift is that they say, oh, well, you should just not be on night shift. And it's not always a choice. It's also some people like their job and they want to do it. And it's also, just that's a side effect.
The world wouldn't work.
Right. You do need nurses in the ER at weird times of the day, right? And doctors and everything else. And so I think this question is coming from someone in healthcare as well. And so I think you work with your schedule. I do the same thing with firefighters where it's 3 days on, 4 days off, whatever the thing is. And firefighters can do a bit of strength training often at work, but we keep it low intensity because they're obviously going to have some stressors. And then usually the day after the work period, we take lighter, which is often people want to rush to do in training. But if you have any sleep debt, then we know that that's going to be really, really hard. So a lot of times what's the situation here? It's sort of like a bunch of really heavy days and then Saturday off.
Sort of seems like 5 really big days and then like a week where you actually have 5 days off.
And so you have some time. And you can't just drill it every one of those days, every one of these weeks. Maybe some weeks you could do a bit of a camp and really hit those 5 days. But I would ease into that first day off, get caught up, get your sleep cycle back to whatever you're going to operate on, whether you're flipping it or keeping it the same if it is night shift. And then those next 4 days can be really great training. So you might do 2 interval sets and 2 longer rides. Obviously, some strength training would be great in there too, but you might try and insert your strength training into those other days if you can fit them as well. But you could do a bit of both. But that's probably the main thing is this schedule seems like you could probably do a bit of a load, deload, and just go back and forth like that.
Yeah, and I will say, I think we're oversimplifying. I might have oversimplified when I said it because it's definitely a bit more like you only would have 3 days fully off on the light week.
Right.
And then you're in kind of in the middle of it. So you'd have 2 days off, 2 days on, 3 days off. Okay. And then you'd have 2 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on. Mm-hmm. So a little funky, but I think that actually it still all applies.
Are they 12-hour shifts? Does it
12-hour shifts, yeah.
It's tough. So then you're basically you can't really fit a lot in. I would say is where I would do, a Dan John easy strength to try and get a bit of movement in to start the day probably.
Well, that was even what I was going to say. I think this is where, we have this 15-minute yoga, strength core, whatever you want to call it, routine that I do every day. That's the kind of thing I would really kind of start implementing in this situation because 15 minutes and you've got that kind of checked off for the day. Mm-hmm. And then, normally we're not huge indoor cycling fans, especially when the weather is actually good. But, when you have a 12-hour shift, I think having that stationary bike set up to do even a 30-minute spin on those busy days, 30, that adds
45,
up.
That 45 to 90 minutes is a common window you'll see for zone 2 training. And again, because of the sleep debt, I probably wouldn't bias to too much intervals. You'd have to know the person, but for general advice, I would say those would be our zone 2, just trying to get the body burning fat or reducing the stress load, whereas we wouldn't want to add a bunch of stress on these days where the job is stressful, there is some sleep disturbance potentially, or because of the 12 hours it's just sort of a long day. So that's what I would do, is try and think about ways to what do they call that, work in versus work out would be the sort of the cliche way to put that, or think about building yourself back up. Endurance training generally is going to raise our HRV or raise our recovery, de-stress. So I think that's what you would be thinking on those days, so that then you do get, Molly only needed one day a week of intensity. So you're trying to find that day, what Dan Cleather calls the hot workout day or the breakthrough workout. So that could be the second or third day you're off. And then again, one long ride, and then a couple of these unremarkable. For Molly, this is a 5-mile run or a 6-mile run, or I think now like an 8-mile run. But whatever your normal, for a lot of my cyclists, it's 1 hour to 1.5 hours. We just call these unremarkable workouts. So those can be done most days when you do have the time, but we always want to protect sort of the meals. The eating is really good, and the sleep. The sleep is so huge, is to try and get it wherever you can.
Yeah, and I do want to have another sleep expert on. It's been a while since we've had one. And I think, there's more and more coming out talking about exercise close to bed for a lot of people doesn't work great for, quality of sleep. So definitely, it might hurt to have to like do your workout before work in the morning, but really knowing yourself and knowing how well you sleep if you train after work versus before work on these 12-hour days. Because no matter what, you're like, with a 12-hour day, your workout is butting up against either right when you wake up or pretty close to bed.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, in that episode, or one of the episodes he was on, did speak towards that idea of, I think he had sort of tested and just sort of kept notes of this high intensity workout or this sweet spot or this zone 2 or this strength, and then how did it affect immediate sleep right afterwards. So that, I think, would be a little bit of experimentation in what you can get away with. But again, you'd want to be careful that you're not robbing yourself of sleep or meal times or falling back on your nutrition, because you're trying to always be back as soon as you can, but get that weekly intensity workout where you're ready for it.
All right. Love it. And yeah, definitely let us know if you have, a specific wacky shift that you want us to talk through.
And I will say we have some really great people. I don't want to necessarily say their names, but there's some really top, certainly the endurance folks, who I think really use this, because I would be ruined.
That's true. He would.
By this, like any sleep. Like I've been going to bed at 9 o'clock for my entire life, which I think has been great and has probably helped me in some ways. But like, I am not a 24-hour racer. I am not these, even something like Unbound or Leadville, I think terrify me because I'd disrupt my sleep. I wouldn't sleep all night and then I'd wake up at 4 a.m. So if you wanted to do 24-hour races or these extreme gravel races or what else is at night? Just these feats of endurance. I think this is where I see a lot of these people, when I'm thinking through all the faces and names I know who are nurses and doctors and night shift. These people are pretty good at hard stuff, that's especially when it gets into long days so I think that's where framing this as doing the training that's smart for you, that's going to see progress. We should see the progress. Your health should be good. You shouldn't be getting sick. So we're taking care of all those, but then thinking like, what events can I do well in? What are my strengths versus like, oh, my weakness is like, I don't sleep well and I'm up all night because of this. Think about, well, what events are going to like really let me thrive? And we have the same discussion with people and their body weight or their body type or their power. They're sprinters, but they get dropped on the climb. And it's like, well, what if you found an event that really rewarded sprinting? There's a few of these that are pretty rewarding if you do well at them. So again, try and find, they're the hip events now, are these long things. So find the one that, speaks to you in whatever discipline and probably bias towards that.
I like that. It's funny. I was just giving a talk to 5th graders last week as part of my little book tour. And one thing I was talking to them about is really trying to see themselves as characters in their own story. And then we were talking about like what your superpower is. And I was talking about how, even stuff that you don't necessarily think of as being a positive, like how can it actually be your superpower? And I was talking about, when I was a kid, I was super shy. So this is like a very off topic example. Sorry. But, when I was a kid, I was shy. And to me, that's actually a superpower now for when I'm doing these presentations and talks and stuff. I think, even if you look at our Shred Girls launch, like there were a couple of really shy girls there. And by the end, they were chatting with people. They were running around and playing and stuff. And I think part of that is because as a shy kid, I know how to not push them into doing stuff that's going to make them uncomfortable.
Sure.
So yeah, for you, it's like, yes, the shift work stuff can suck and like feel like it's a huge detriment, but what if it was actually your, as you say, kind of like, what if it was to your benefit?
There's all sorts of ways to run and bike, and, there's triathlon, there's orienteering was happening this past weekend at our local trails. And it's like, well, orienteering is not a thing, and then I saw there's a Barkley imitation event up north from us this past weekend. Not as quite as extreme, but it sounded sort of extreme. So there's all these things that reward you for having other attributes. And if your attribute is you can keep yourself awake and functioning and thinking because you've been training to work as a nurse with people in dire situations, I bet you'll do really well. So I think also thinking towards that, like how can you use this, your quote unquote weird hours? Well, it sounds like you'd do fantastic at a 24-hour race where, yeah, sure, I'm just up for 36 hours. I do this all the time. So I think as much as you'll see experts and probably, even I'm like, you should sleep, find something that rewards it. Yeah. And there's lots of these people out there. If you just look, in Ontario alone, I can think of like 5 right now. I just don't want to necessarily out them as examples if they don't want to be outed. So there you go.
Realized you have glitter in your eyebrows right now. And I don't know. I'm very curious what you've been up to since I left.
On my tombstone or what is it? Glitter on the eyebrows.
Don't know what's happening right now. Okay, next question here. Warming up for a long race / like warm up in general. I think this is a great question as more and more racers are doing, these gravel events and stuff like that, where it's like, do you warm up? How do you warm up? Should you warm up?
So the takeaway, you're interviewing me for an article, would be like when it's a short race, the warm up's usually longer. When it's a long race, it's usually shorter or non-existent. There isn't really a warm up. So in your 100-miler, what did you do to warm up?
Ran to the porta potty a bunch of times.
Right. You got ready. You got your equipment ready. You made sure the pack was there. You made sure your aid stuff was there. There's a lot of preparations. Make sure your devices are synced and you're there on time. And there's not really a lot. I would say for biking, it's similar. You roll to the start, make sure your gears shift and your brakes stop you, that like nothing's changed. Your tires have air in them. There's not a lot. If there's so then those are the two extremes. So 100-mile or track warm up. So a track warm up, how long do they roll on rollers? Some of them might be there. Or if we think about Misha, Molly's author, what is this book called with Misha?
Misha Powell, Sprinting Through Setbacks.
So she would show up to the track and her workout would be like 2 by 80 meters or something. But to warm up for those two efforts, this is just training, not even race day. She would be there like an hour and a half, maybe longer. I don't want to, it's something like that. An hour and a half, 2.5, 3 hours before to train and warm up and do skips and stretching and some light.
Oh yeah, track is wild.
And total distance covered might be 3K or something over the 4 or 5 hours of the training period. So those would be the streams. Track cycling would be similar. Cyclocross, people roll up on rollers. They're doing the pre-ride windows. And it's cold. So the other thing we can consider if we were trying to make like a flow chart is if it's cold, it'll take long to warm up. Hopefully that's apparent, right?
Well, yes.
And then if it's smoking hot out, the other side of this range would be that you don't really need to warm up because you're probably already really hot and that's going to affect the race. So you actually need to try and stay cool.
Yeah, I was going to say in both of those, you're really trying to search for your temperature equilibrium, right? Like when it's cold, you need to warm up more because you need to stay warm. You don't want to stop and get really cold.
This is true.
When it's hot, you don't want to overheat.
And your body will sit at that temperature. Yeah, you do want to get your body to a core temperature. There's hormones that we want to get in there. There's the blood and the cardiovascular priming to get sort of the VO2 priming, I think is what they call that. VO2. Well, let's call it priming. That's not what it's called, I don't think. But just sort of get the body ready. And so in theory, then what we do is if this is like a mountain bike race that's sort of an hour to 3 hours, then you probably warm up for maybe 30 minutes. But you'll see a lot of people who get nervous and they go an hour before. And then they're just burning energy, maybe overheating, the fueling. You can just see the glycogen stores decreasing. And so that's probably too long. So in general, you're going to see 30, maybe 40 minutes. Maybe a bit of that time is standing in the start pen. And then you're going to go. Now, one of the mistakes then is what is that warm up? And so again, we can take a page, I think, and you're seeing this more in cycling where there is a bit of mobility or activation or what do people do? Not skips, but maybe some jumping. Maybe you're doing some pogo jumps. And the catch here is that this can't be something you invent randomly because you're nervous on race day. So you start doing cat camel in front of a group of people in the public. What you want to do is have something that you do most days to get ready. And this might be a physiotherapy exercise or something like that. And so that's the second part of this question was, do you do activation exercises before your workouts?
People laugh, but I could totally see someone slipping a disc doing cat camel if they don't do it normally.
And right? they're nervous or something.
Yeah.
So that would be the thing. So maybe you start and you're sort of getting your kid on, and this is what we might expand even into a pre-performance routine. So in the same way we talk about Misha is showing up at the track, and maybe she always does her socks and her shoes up in a certain way. Maybe there's a music playlist she always listens to. There's maybe a fueling, a pre-workout, a carbohydrate drink that she's taking in. Maybe there's a coffee or caffeine element to this. Maybe she reviews her goals from her goal-setting book. Then maybe she does a light jog for 100 meters. So this might be like you going and testing your gears and tires. Then you come back. Then maybe you do, again, a bit of stretching mobility. Then maybe you go and ride a little longer, 5 to 15 minutes, just easy pace, just maybe building. Then maybe you come back and maybe you're getting warm, so you take a coat off. Then maybe you go and you do, often what we use is 3 to 5 by 45 seconds. Nothing fancy. Each one's a little harder. Often I'll give the target of whatever the race heart rate average is for your mountain bike race, your cyclocross race. So say Molly goes and the average for that 1 hour cyclocross race is 170 beats and her max is 190 beats in the race, or 180 or whatever. The max doesn't really matter in this example. So 170. So roughly around, and usually that's around your threshold heart rate, or like 85%. It's not a super high heart rate, but it's around the average. So I sometimes will put that out there as like that's a good sign your cardiovascular system is ready. And so we'll probably get there by doing 45 seconds hard, rest for 3 to 5 minutes, just easy spinning again and again and again. Now, some people do that with 30-30s, or like if they're on the trainer or the rollers, they might ramp up. They'll go like 130 beats per minute for 2 or 3 minutes, 140 beats for 2 or 3 minutes. And you could do that by wattage as well, but just sort of a step test like you've probably done to test your Zwift threshold or whatever, or maybe for a VO2 max test. So just gradually building, not to full max, but just where that heart rate's slowly getting up and you're getting warm. So that would be the idea, is that we want to do it pretty quickly rather than riding for an hour or 2 hours before you do the race. And that's probably true of most events, is that you want to be careful that you don't just burn all your energy because you're nervous beforehand. So hopefully that makes sense. That's like warm up is like 30 minutes with a few little efforts or pickups in them.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say, like, it is so hard to not, if you're a nervous racer like I am, it is so hard to not burn matches sitting in the van. Like, I swear, I think the morning of my race, like, my heart rate was probably higher in the van as I was trying to eat breakfast than it was the entirety of that race.
Sure. Yeah, and then you start seeing like your friend is getting their clothes on, and you want to, now they're on the rollers and you're just sitting there in your street clothes, and it's like, well, so this might be where you have to go somewhere else, or again, if you can go somewhere and get sort of your clothes on, or you can get whatever, just start doing something else, set your bike up. But you want to be careful that you don't. Sometimes I'll even get dressed really early. So I probably goad other people into start warming up early. But then you could just go sit and talk to someone under a tree or under another tent and stay cool and sipping your carbohydrate drink or whatever you're going to do. And that way you're ready to go at a moment's notice. You're all set. You have lots of time, but don't rush to start burning energy.
Yeah, we definitely know a few racers who, are so, like, if he's doing it, I'll do it. So, I mean, you can also mess with those people. Like, consider this your full license. If you have racers like this around you, definitely feel free to start doing really weird mobility stuff.
Right, like really provocative leg swings.
Yeah, do some push-ups. I don't know. Like,
okay,
some shadow boxing.
So then I think the other thing, so there's sort of two things. I'll get the email on the race day of what should I do for the warm-up? And it's like, well, what you've been doing all the time. And this is just the thing. And I'm always open to co-creating a warm-up. But what we want to do, and I always like kick myself if this question does come, obviously, because I should have done a better job at like reiterating that this is the process. But in the workout every week when Molly does her Wednesday, ideally there would be like, especially if Molly was racing shorter, it's sort of different because your races, but you want to do that pre-performance routine. And I want you to think about it, not just the efforts, because people get way too into the watts and what I'm doing for exact watts and what is the time. But I want you to think, what does it take for me to get warmed up and do a good job on those really hard intervals that you have in your week? And a lot of people will just like not really warm up or not pay attention, and they'll just follow the like erg warm up if there is one. And then they get to race day and they're like, I don't even know what I do before I race. And so that's what you do. You do like a little bit of spinning to get to the hill, and then maybe you do a couple opener efforts, and then when you're ready to go, you go. And so you want to really fine tune what it is you like to do in that period, and the eating and the clothes and all that stuff goes along with it. The music should probably go along with it too when we talk about pre-performance routine. So not paying attention. And then the other one I see a lot, and this is more our older athletes and especially our endurance oriented athletes, who really like zone 2 maybe. They say it takes me a long time to warm up, which can mean a few things, but often it means you don't like doing your intervals. You're like Molly.
Yep.
So you're delaying it, and you don't want to, rip the Band-Aid off really quick. You want to really slowly ease into that. So I think that's a mindset of challenging yourself, and that you have the strength of being an endurance athlete, but you need to practice being uncomfortable. You get into it. Even if the first one's not the best one, get in there. And then the related thing to this topic is you probably aren't warming up in that hour well. You're just riding. What you need to do is gradual build for 5 to 15 minutes, and then a few, let's call it 2 to 5 by 30 to 45 seconds, vigorous efforts, and then you should be ready to go, whatever the workout is. And so that's what I see, is that it takes you an hour, because it takes till you find the first hill or something where the hill's actually forcing you to maybe warm up, or again, you've slowly come to terms with the fact you're going to have to go hard. So sometimes it's you just got to be a little uncomfortable on those Wednesdays, and then the rest of the week can be glorious and nice and what you like. But I do think that that's something worth confronting, because on race day, these are the people that warm up for an hour so that then they can feel good on the start of their 100-mile race. And it's like, well, you just burnt 600 calories that you didn't have to burn.
Yeah, that's, I think, a good point. We talked about burning matches, but the fact is, also, even if you're going easy, you are still burning through those glycogen stores. So it might not feel like you're lighting matches, but you're...
So if I was Keegan Swenson warming up for a 6-hour Leadville, maybe, if he was just going to go on a mission off the start and anticipated he was going to be setting the pace and just wanted to be the most efficient from the gun, maybe there would be a bit more of rollers. And I think you're seeing that now, that they do even spin on rollers in the morning. But as Molly said, some of that is to get warm, because it can be cold in the morning in the dark. The people who are trying to finish Leadville in 12 hours, this is going to be a energy deficit that is going to be very hard to overcome. So in that case, again, it's, are you ready? Is your bike ready? Do you have all the things you're supposed to have? Are the people who are supposed to be in the places they're supposed to be online? And then get to that pen and you'll roll into the day. And I don't think you'll warm up eventually over the day.
Yeah, and especially for new racers, but I think this bears repeating just over and over again. For the love of God, please know when you should be at the start pen. I saw this at NICA, and admittedly, they start their race they start staging 15 minutes early.
Okay. So, is that a lot or not a lot?
15 minutes to be standing with your bike in the start pen?
Oh, I would expect that at any race.
Yeah. No, you had to be at the start area 20, 25 minutes early, and then you're standing staged.
Right.
For 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
So just know what the staging situation is going to be at your race, especially, it was not a big deal in a 100-mile run, because I can run around people in the first 50 meters.
Sure.
And I can kind of sneak through people. You can't sneak through people with a bike. No one wants to let you get around them.
Yeah, if you have some clout, sometimes you can be like, hey, come on. But usually the people are still grumpy. So it's better not to be that person or use that card if you don't have to. And so Molly's right. The warm-up, if we think about it tactically, might actually just be running to the start line to get the best start you can, or the start you need to get, the start placing you need. And then it's big coat and dancing on the spot, jumping.
I was going to say, I think that's actually where the dumb mobility stuff has become trendier. Or it's become trendier because, especially now, we're staging in gravel races 15 minutes before the start. You can't really, you have to be there to get in your spot if you want to get a good spot. So now you're, missing you're getting cold for 10 minutes. And now what do I do? Well, I guess I do some leg swings.
And that is well supported. You'll see that is whatever you can do to generate heat. And most of what generates heat is muscular contraction. So a big coat, I bought, finally we found me a big trench winter coat that's waterproof, and it's just the warmest coat. It's my life is complete. So that's what if I had support, I would try and wear that on something like the Leadville start line, and then try and be already warm if I could. But at 5 a.m., I'm probably not going to get, on rollers. And then it's sort of just dancing in the spot. Maybe this is where those hand warmers to try and get heat inside. Maybe there's, I don't know, tea or something, heated coat.
Sipping from like your little like ceramic cup, just or porcelain.
And that's just because we know, again, the body has an operating temperature, just like your car, right? Where this is one element of the warm up. But the other element that maybe we didn't explain completely is these activation efforts are the other elements that your body needs, like coordination, neuromuscular, so the connection of your brain to your muscles. These need to be coordinated. And that's why if you just ride easy, this is not athletic. This is not really pushing the temperature up that much. It will gradually build, but going harder is more muscular contraction, more heart beating, more blood flowing, more demand on the body. So you're going to really accelerate the warm up, but also get the neuromuscular, I think a bit of mental, right? You get I say the first crappy effort out of the way.
I was going to say, it really does kind of like soothe your like jangling nerves, because I think it does push a little bit of the adrenaline just out.
Right. And that's where developing, again, pre-performance routine is not just the watts or not just the intervals you're doing. It's this whole thing from when even the morning breakfast can be wrapped into, even the day before can be wrapped in if you want. But really those hour to 3 hours before are the critical pre-performance routine. And so that's what you want, is you want it to be almost like step by step by step, and it clicks you into this is the zone or flow state where every time you go 15 minutes and then 3 to 5 by 30 to 45 second efforts, and it's just familiar. And the more you do it, that's it. And so at races, often I'll just find like a section of the course that's not being used. Sorry, not section of the course. I'm going to get in trouble. A section of the venue that has a little hill, and I'll just go up and down it 5 times and then spin around the venue or whatever, especially if I'm trying to watch the staging area and be doing this close to the start. Because we said we don't want you to start an hour before, but that's what sometimes people start because it's 10 o'clock, races at 11, but they've already been riding, and then the staging happens 5 minutes before and they've ridden for 55 minutes. So it is that dangerous dance of when do you start so that you do get to staging, but you have your warm up done, but it's not done 3 hours before the race.
For sure. Okay, well, I'm really stressed now. Just talking about warm-ups and race starts gets me a little adrenaline-y. But I think with that, let's wrap up there. If anyone has any further questions for any of that, definitely hit us up. Like we said, there's an anonymous form now that we'll include a link to in the show notes.
And people could still use the DMs. It's just we thought maybe that would get some more questions that were embarrassing or funny or something
Sexier,
in there as
well.
So definitely feel free to ask for a friend via the anonymous form, or you can just ding us on the DMs.
Yes.
Ding us?
Ding us? DM us.
Okay.
Slip into our DMs. We're at Consummate Athlete, at Peter Glassford, and at Molly J. Herford. And with that, happy training, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.